Hello, my name is Ed Wardbrook. I run the Collaboration and Application Initiatives at Carousel Industry. And I'm here today to present a presentation I'm delivering at Enterprise Connect called Technology in Search of a Customer. Critical factors to consider for your UC strategy. The reason why I focus on technology is that within the marketplace, technology sometimes, under the notion of the shiny object, has overtaken companies from a decision-making criteria. And instead, we'd rather look at some market opportunities to advance a broader solution conversation. Now, to begin with, we have to look at the ever-changing dynamics within many, many markets which converged around this notion of unified communications. So on this chart, you'll see some block diagrams, some terms. Let me just call some of them out. The notion of Moore's Law, which is the production 2 times increase in productivity or performance with a cost reduction by 50% every 2 years, continues to thrive. If we look at the iPad 1 to the iPad 2, it eclipsed itself inside of 2 years. We look at Metcalfe's law. The value of networking grows exponentially as more and more people confine themselves to open federated networks. UC software, as measured by some of the analysts, has been projected to grow to over $17 billion by 2015. We have the notion of cloud-based solutions such as HCS from Cisco, Office 365 from Microsoft, and announced just this week the Avaya Collaborative Cloud. 333, what does that stand for? Well, 3 million iPad 3s were sold in 3 days. And it's projected that tablets in and of themselves, over 155 million will be sold in the next 2 years. A recent study, right after the announcement of iPad, the company quoted that the combination of 4G wireless capability, the availability of high definition on the iPad, and quad-core computing on the platform will be the single biggest enabler of mobile video in the marketplace. And we'll learn more about that in a little bit. We look at the growth of Android. 57% of all smartphones today are running Android, and 24% of all tablets. And both of those are looking to increase over time. The notion of mobile device management is essential, a critical part of any business where you have multi-vendors. And companies like Aruba have announced a product called ClearPass, and other companies are in the space. So mobile device management is going to be critical as device proliferation is continuing to be driven by consumer-based choice. Next generation firewalls. I mean, generations of firewalls, first gen, were really predicated on port and protocol. Well, the next generations are at the application layer. So think specifically that before you may disallow the use of Skype. Well, in the next generation, you can allow Skype, but have the ability to disable file sharing, another security step that you can take. SAP has talked about HANA, the development of an in-memory entire application process. It supposedly dramatically reduces the search time, taking hours into minutes, and also provide a far more cost-effective and flexible platform. And on the wireless side, we see the continued concern, particularly in North America, about the limitations of the 3G and 4G networks to handle the demand. We hear about wireless companies throttling back the capability. There was a story the other day in USA Today that a person bought their iPad 3 and within the first 48 hours had exceeded their 2 gig wireless plan with their mobile carrier. So mobile carriers are trying to deal with, one, throttling of traffic, which then has direct implications on the quality, particularly if it's video. So one of the advances that they're taking, albeit maybe a Band-Aid approach, is something called MIMO, M-I-M-O. Multiple in, multiple out. It's a mesh network of wireless antennas. And lastly, as we look at the device proliferation, we have to look at the wide area and wireless networks themselves. So we have the advent of the 802.11 class. Started out with 54 meg, now it's up to 300, and the proposals that are in front of the committees right now, 802.11 AC, will drive it up to 1 gigabit. So these market dynamics are all converging on the demand for new devices in a mobile environment, and how point products themselves should not be the sole focus of a criteria for rolling something out. It should have a solutions orientation. UC Strategies, who's well represented here, people like Blair Pleasant, Jim Burton, Marty Parker, Don Van Doren, developed this UC continuum a couple of years ago. And if you look at the first 3 waves, it's very, very technology focused. And I think that is an indication of where the market has been, where people have looked at point products and not necessarily holistic solutions. So we're going to categorize that as a technology group. However, the last wave, we start to really see the benefit of business process integration. And I heard Marty Parker use the term communications integrated to optimize business processes is really the definition of UC from their perspective. So we see the value in changing the dialogue with customers, on behalf of their business and their initiatives under the term business solutions. So how do we define unified communications? You know, two simple words, yet there are dozens and dozens of definitions that exist. So our belief is the true promise of unified communications really pivots on significantly improving how individuals, groups, and communities perform and interact across a multi-vendor environment. And that is the key aspect, multi-vendor. The all single stack sole solution provider misses out on the true benefits that customers are looking for more and more. And by having that multi-vendor experience and focusing on the user, we actually can raise the value of every transaction within that enterprise. UC also becomes the fabric that enables business processes and workflows so they can more easily integrate into multiple forms of communications using a common user, administrator, and developer interface, thereby removing single-threaded technologies which have been across the landscape for decades. Where do we begin? Well, instead of pursuing simply technology, our drive is to have a dialogue to know the business. Understand the company's business objectives. So there's 5 components to this. And hopefully if I'm successful, you'll see the logical interlocking between them. Understanding the business strategy and objectives is the starting point. What are the goals that that particular organization has? How are they going to design themselves around achieving or exceeding those goals? The second is understanding what the business model is. Is it a direct model? Is it indirect? How are the organizations working? What's the relationship between customer service and IT and the rest of the communities that they serve? And key to understanding that, then you see how they're operationalized in order to drive against the business objectives. Third, understand the communities and the connections. This is a critical part of as we develop use cases. You look at individual groups within the organization who have the largest area of responsibility to drive the objectives and understand how they are effective today. What's their wish list? Not from a technology, but how do you improve the processes and methodologies that are in place to allow them to work in a framework that drives the business objectives. Fourth, understand the infrastructure and systems that they have at their disposal. In many cases, the notion of bring your own device is an anathema to how IT and customer support organizations have typically run. There's been a lot more control where IT is the validation in place of dispensing those technologies. But more and more, we're seeing consumer-based products filter into the business model. So understanding those systems and the infrastructure, coupled with the people who are using it, internal and external, customers, partners, suppliers, and understanding the actual business model, we start to now see a connected network. And at the end of that, understand what defines success. What are the key performance indicators? So if we understand the objectives, we understand the organizations that we have to work through and work with because of influencer and decision-making authority. We look at the communities who are going to be most affected by that and who they connect with every single day to achieve their objectives. We leverage as much of the existing infrastructure or the planned infrastructure, and we've just gone through a whole series of comments about the infrastructure dynamics that are overtaking the industry. And then at the end, how do we measure the success? We believe by focusing in clearly on those 5 key initiatives, we will develop and deliver a solutions-oriented approach with meaningful return on investment, as opposed to simply taking technology which is being proposed by a manufacturer as a solution or the end game. Now, let me take you down a pathway. This is a reference architecture. It is intended to be functional in nature, and it's to look to depict a very classical 3-tier model. Now, typically you would begin at the bottom of the architecture from an IT and engineering standpoint and work your way up. I'm going to inverse the conversation because today the market, the customers, the structure of their organization is being more and more driven by the end user experience. Matter of fact, last year CIO Magazine, in their list of the top 10 initiatives, identified a struggle between marketing and the IT and operations group as who is going to define and control the user experience. So we've talked about the proliferation of devices. We see where hardware is becoming more commoditized and software is becoming more pervasive. We can look at the iPads, we can look at the smartphones, we can look at kiosks, we can look at lockdown environments involving Citrix and other vendors. So if we look at the user experience and how they are driven to successfully drive the business objectives, then we have a core group of people to really understand what their business needs are. We then have to look at the infrastructure itself. Do the collaborative applications exist to allow people to communicate real-time and non-real-time, go between different media types, do it within a policy-oriented architecture, conform to any particular requirements regarding regulation or other internal policies, and make sure that that environment is extensive in that it can support many users independent of the location and independent of the network. The third layer looks at, what do we do from a core foundation standpoint? This is where we look at wireless LANs, we look at the carriers. Mentioned before about the challenge in North America with the wireless carriers relative to spectrum capacity. We talked about the significant growth of wireless from an internal class of users. Think about the iPhone, which if I had here, I'd hold up. The key aspect is, this is one of the first devices that doesn't ship with an Ethernet port. So it demands to have a wireless infrastructure, both Wi-Fi and 4G. And along the bottom, we look at security. What is the aspect of security? I mentioned next generation firewalls. We have SBCs, we have deep packet inspection, we have denial of service. So to look at this holistically is critical in delivering on the needs of the organization. So I'm going to create a hypothetical situation. I'm an insurance company, and I have 100 wealth management sales executives. They've come to me with a proposal that they would like to take their tablets, vendor independent, and actually create an application that allows them to move in front of their wealth management customers from any network in the world, and actually present to them customized experiences. And that's a great idea, but at the same time, it's being driven by a handheld device. They become enamored with that shiny object. This is wonderful. I can touch, I can flip, isn't this great? And they may be immune to the overall infrastructure impediments to maybe successfully roll that out. So, what would be the approach? Well, I'm going to take you through this series of steps that if this proposal was accepted, the dynamics associated with actually rolling this out. Well, the first thing is I have to procure the device. I have to buy the device, register it, possibly do some basic administration to make sure the policy, the authentication, the authorization services are available and confined within the structure of how I support all desktop environments. The next, I have to look at the policy. I may have to go into my corporate directory and add that capability as another persona to an individual. I have to look at policies about how I'm able to move this new class of devices between locations. I may have a policy about desktop refreshes, virus malware protection. May have policies associated with if the device is lost or stolen, how do I remotely wipe all the information, which is the intellectual property of the company. I then look further into my security. What are the security levels from next generation firewall capability to allowing SIP addressing, depending on the capabilities of the device. Then I look at the applications that this wealth management team is looking to showcase. Well, part of it is their need to be able to respond to messages, because it's a tool that not only is used to deliver communication to their clients, but also for them as they're moving around the marketplace. I may want to be able to do conferencing. As I'm actually consulting with one of my customers, they'd like to talk to a subject matter expert. So why not have the ability to spin that capability up? Talk a little bit about, if the example could be as simple as taking the Polycom Real Presence application and having it running on my iPad, the ability to go back into my corporate network, I have to configure that. I have to govern the rules, the access methods, the ability of that application on the iPad to register within the Polycom infrastructure, as just one example. The fifth is video, not only from a point-to-point, which is built into the iPad, or most other tablets, but more the ability to understand how do I allow for what historically has been islands of communities, desktop video, telepresence video, room systems, to actually commingle within a conference. Polycom has taken significant steps through partnerships with Microsoft. Avaya has recently gone into the space with RadVision. So I think there's a number of opportunities to understand at the user level what the use case is. And it boils back to sitting down with a wealth managed sales executive and saying, on a day-to-day basis, describe what you're going to be doing, what services you want to provide, who you're going to be communicating with, where in the world are you going to be stationed in the delivery of that. And that starts to build a deeper understanding of the underlying services. I also have to look at, do I have other capabilities built into my core foundation for data services? Am I able to go in and actually access stored files through my enterprise content management, on my email system, that I can also pull up and retrieve on behalf of the conversation I want to have with the customer? As we start to look at that, we now start to see what is the physical demand on the infrastructure that we have in place. If you think about teeing up 500 users. Let's say there was a conference at the company, and I had 100 of these wealth management sales executives show up, go into 1 or 2 conference rooms, and simultaneously want to tee up video. Now, I could override my entire wireless network simply by supporting that small group of users, and therefore disabling the rest of my organization from effective communications. I may have the need to reduce the video content, either by throttling down the bit rate, going from high definition to more standard definition capabilities. These are all trade-offs that, with the notion of, hey, I want to bring my iPad into the work, didn't fully contemplate the breadth of impacts across the network. On the 8th bullet, what is the carrier side? What is the WAN optimization if I'm going between sites to try to traffic my video? So clear understanding, again, use cases will start to expose a deeper set of requirements. Business processes become an integral part of it. I may be traveling and actually get an alert, and I want to be brought into that particular conversation. I may have governance policies relative to what I'm able to store on my device versus what do I have remote access to. What are the encryption technologies that may be used to protect corporate assets? Again, a factoring in of a more complex environment. Number 10, I need to know how I'm going to be managing these services. Because if I have any disruption in the quality of that experience, I want to be able to do an end-to-end analysis of every hop within that communique to see where there may be a point of vulnerability and take steps in order to improve the quality of that as opposed to allowing that service to continue to be degraded. And lastly, maybe I look at the application development environment. We look at 2 ends of the spectrum. We have Apple, which has exercised a lot of control in the verification of applications before they sit inside the iTunes store. We've had Android having a much more open approach, which allows many application vendors to essentially agree to provide non-affecting applications, adversely affecting, I should say, applications into their store. So you may actually have a policy that actually provides a lockdown environment precluding the availability of third-party applications without first having IT approval. And/or there may be a development environment within the organization itself that helps sponsor those particular services. So, if I look at the totality of that, what began as a simple request to actually bring an iPad into the office actually had 10 or 11 different touch points that could directly affect the network. And if you're looking at a product, a product-specific solution, you may miss the nuances of how that entire solution should be delivered and the implications are to your business. Because that $499 device could require thousands and thousands of dollars of infrastructure support. So, if we take the solution approach as opposed to the product approach, by understanding the day-to-day use cases of key stakeholders within an organization, there are multiple impact zones that we can affect. So this chart here, let me give you the X and Y's, and let me thank, recognize Forrester for their wave in which I've liberally borrowed from here. So on the X-axis, you have savings. On the left side, productivity savings. On the right side, hard savings. On the Y-axis, we have benefits. Again, IT and operations benefits, all the way up to line of business benefits. And then the 4 waves move from left to right as the value increases over time. Infrastructure savings, typically more hard savings identifiable, applications, business processes, and what I'll call knowledge or knowledge management. I've looked at 3 phases of this. And again, it broadens the conversation beyond just a technology of a product. The first phase is really focused on where can I get infrastructure benefits simply by taking advantage of data consolidation efforts, collapsing to a common SIP infrastructure, and moving more to the ability to support a decentralized environment or a distributed environment with more centralized services. The ability to get further optimization out of my infrastructure, to remove multiple products and do some consolidation, whether it's in messaging, collaboration, content management. It becomes a basis for which all of the future applications and businesses' processes can ride on. The value of focusing in on this first step is that often it can be a funding model for subsequent investments. SIP consolidation alone can lead to a 15 to 20% reduction in the annual facility costs. And where budgets are tight, you could roll those savings directly in to future investments. On the second phase, we're now looking at the application side because we have the infrastructure in place. We want to enhance the client experience, whether it's touch, whether it's speech, whether it's point-to-click, as it moves across different operating systems and platforms. We like to get more in the collaborative environment. How do I seamlessly transition from one media to multimedia, from a few users to a large number of users. This could be in the sales side, this could be in the customer support side, it could be in the collaborative marketing and public relations side. My ability to reduce system administrative costs go further as I'm able to run those applications more intelligently across a common set of databases because I've collapsed key aspects of my infrastructure. Looking at the growth of mobility. Recently spoke to a customer that had what they felt was an uncontrolled set of international calling charges associated with their mobile support organization. And we're looking for ways to get a better handle on that. So those solutions not only made a slight alteration to their infrastructure, but it directly impacted the quality and cost effectiveness of their ability to deliver against key business processes such as customer support. And a third phase is now moving again further into the business process and knowledge side. What do we do, one, on the hard way to continue to reduce the footprint as we're taking advantage of virtualization? How do we look at application development to spawn off new creative solutions on behalf of the customer? How do we look at key performance indicators that actually drive workflow? The notion of business intelligence and business analytics. So again, the value is if we point or pivot on a technology, we may miss the broader opportunities here. So at the end of the day, the desire to go from one place to another is typically well-founded. But understand the conditions in which you're going to be working. Because if you buy technology versus choosing a solution, you potentially wreak havoc on the long-term needs that you have. But it becomes a choice. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today and look forward to further conversations about where Carousel Industries is focusing its capabilities and practices on solutions that drive greater value on behalf of our customers. Thank you.